Commander Oran sat alone in his observation room, staring at data that made no sense. He had checked the sensors 3 times. He had run every diagnostic test his ship could perform. The results remained the same, and they terrified him. Something was broadcasting from deep inside the nebula. The nebula was a place where ships went to die. Radiation storms tore through that region of space with enough force to rip apart any known vessel within hours. The electromagnetic interference made navigation impossible. No species in the galaxy had ever successfully traveled through it. The hegemony had marked it as a dead zone centuries ago and forgotten about it. But now, something inside that death trap was sending out a signal, and not just any signal. It was broadcasting on a frequency that the galaxy had not heard in 300 years. A human frequency. Oran felt his 4 hearts beat faster. He was old enough to remember the stories his grandfather had told him about the human war. He had been just a child when the Hegemony Council decided that humanity was too dangerous to exist. The humans had refused to bow to galactic authority. They had rejected the hegemony's demands for submission. And when the combined fleets of 12 species descended upon them, the humans had fought back with a ferocity that still gave veterans nightmares. The war was supposed to be quick. The hegemony had superior numbers, superior technology, and superior resources. But the humans did not care about the odds. They fought for every inch of space, every asteroid, every moon. They turned their own ships into weapons when their guns ran empty. They never surrendered, never retreated, never begged for mercy. It took 11 months to break them. 11 months of brutal combat that cost the hegemony more lives than any conflict in their history. When it was finally over, the Council made a decision that haunted them to this day. They ordered the complete extermination of the human species. Earth was burned until its surface turned to glass. Every colony was sterilized. Every ship was hunted down and destroyed. Or so the official records claimed. Oran stared at his screen and wondered if those records had lied. He made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. He launched a probe into the nebula, a heavily shielded drone designed to survive in harsh environments. It would not last long but it might last long enough to discover the source of the signal. The probe transmitted data for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds before the radiation destroyed it. What it sent back in those final moments made Oran's blood run cold. There was a ship in the nebula, not just any ship. The probe's sensors had identified it clearly before failing. It was the HSS Prometheus, the legendary flagship of the human resistance fleet. The ship had been commanded by Admiral Vance, the most feared human commander in history. She had personally destroyed 37 hegemony vessels during the war. The hegemony had finally cornered her at the Battle of, where they reported the Prometheus destroyed with all hands. But the Prometheus was not destroyed. It was here, drifting through radiation storms that should have killed it centuries ago, broadcasting a message that repeated over and over again. The message was in the old human language, and Oran had to access ancient translation archives to understand it. When the words appeared on his screen, he felt true fear for the first time in his long life. "We remember, we endure, we return." He immediately contacted High Command. Within hours, his report had reached the Hegemony Council itself. The reaction was panic barely contained behind walls of protocol and procedure. Emergency sessions were called. Classified files were accessed. The council members who had survived the human war gathered in secret chambers and spoke in whispers about the impossible thing that had happened. The humans had survived. For 300 years, the hegemony had told the galaxy that humanity was extinct. They had used the human extermination as a warning to other species who might think of resisting, obey the hegemony, or share the fate of the humans. It had worked perfectly. No species had dared to rebel since then. The memory of what happened to Earth kept the galaxy in line. But if the humans were still alive, everything changed. The hegemony's greatest victory was revealed as a lie. Their most powerful threat was empty. Every species that had cowered under their rule would learn that resistance was possible, that even total annihilation could be survived. The Council could not allow that truth to spread. They made a decision quickly, driven by fear rather than wisdom. They would send a battle group to the nebula. They would find the Prometheus and destroy it, this time for certain. They would bury this secret before it could spread, before it could give hope to the subjugated species who still whispered about the humans who had almost won. The battle group assembled within days. 12 warships, including 2 heavy cruisers armed with weapons capable of destroying moons. Orion was ordered to lead them, though he suspected his true purpose was to be silenced along with whatever they found. The Council did not like loose ends. As the fleet prepared to enter the nebula, Orion received one final piece of intelligence that his analysts had decoded from the probe's data. The Prometheus was not simply drifting. It was moving with purpose, navigating through the radiation storms as if they posed no threat at all. The ship's shields were unlike anything in the hegemony database, using technology that should not exist. The humans had not spent 3 centuries hiding. They had spent 3 centuries preparing. Orion tried to warn the Council, but his messages went unanswered. The battle group had its orders: find the ghost ship, destroy it, return victorious. What the Council failed to understand, what Orion was just beginning to suspect, was that the broadcast from the Prometheus was not a cry for help. It was not the desperate signal of survivors hopping for rescue. It was bait. The humans had waited 300 years for this moment. They had survived in the most hostile environment the galaxy had to offer. They had watched their burn and their species declared extinct. They had passed their hatred and their hope down through generations, preparing for a day that most of them would never live to see. And now finally that day had come. As Orion's fleet entered the nebula, moving toward the signal that called to them like a light in the darkness, the ghost ship began to move. Deep within its ancient hull, systems that had been dormant for decades powered up. Weapons that had never been fired charged to full capacity. And somewhere on the bridge, a human commander smiled for the first time in years. The hunt was about to begin. But the hegemony had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were the hunters. They were wrong. Captain Cole stood on the bridge of the Prometheus and watched his enemies enter the trap. 12 ships, including 2 heavy cruisers. The hegemony was taking no chances with a ghost they thought they had killed 3 centuries ago. Cole was a tall man with gray hair and scars that told the story of a hard life. He had been born on this ship 62 years ago. His parents had been born here as well, and their parents before them. 7 generations of Coles had served aboard the Prometheus, passing down the mission that Admiral Vance had given them before she died. Survive, prepare, return. Admiral Vance was a legend among Cole's people. She had commanded the Prometheus during the war, fighting battle after battle against impossible odds. When Earth fell and the colonies burned, she had done what no one thought possible. She had taken her damaged ship into the nebula, gambling that the radiation storms would hide them from hegemony sensors. It was a desperate choice. The Prometheus should have been destroyed within days, but Vance and her crew refused to die. They modified their shields using technology scavenged from destroyed enemy ships. They learned to read the patterns of the radiation storms, finding calm spots where they could rest and repair. They turned the nebula that should have been their grave into a fortress. Vance lived for 200 years after the war, leading her people through the hardest times. She watched the original crew grow old and die. She trained new generations to take their place. She oversaw the construction of hidden stations deeper in the nebula, places where her people could grow food, raise children, and build the weapons they would need for the day of return. When Vance finally died, she left behind 50,000 humans and a plan that had been 3 centuries in the making. Cole had never met the Admiral. She had died 80 years before he was born. But he felt her presence every day in the ship that surrounded him, in the mission that drove him, in the hatred for the hegemony that had been passed down through his bloodline like a sacred inheritance. His first officer, lieutenant commander, approached with the latest sensor data. She was younger than Cole, with sharp eyes and a mind that worked faster than anyone he had ever known. Her family had served as tactical officers for generations, and she carried that legacy with pride. 12 ships confirmed, she reported. 2 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 6 support vessels. They are moving in standard search formation, spreading out to cover more area. Cole nodded slowly. The hegemony commanders were following their training exactly as expected. They thought they were searching for a crippled refugee ship hiding from detection. They had no idea what was really waiting for them. "Status of Project Tempest?" he asked. Allowed herself a small smile. "Fully charged and ready for deployment. 47,000 units standing by." Project Tempest was humanity's answer to the hegemony's superior numbers. For 3 centuries, the survivors in the nebula had worked on a single goal. They could not build enough ships to challenge the hegemony fleet directly. They could not match their enemy in firepower or armor or speed, but they could innovate. Tempest drones were small, each one barely the size of a human fist. They were powered by miniature reactors that the hegemony could not detect on standard sensors. They carried weapons that disrupted shield harmonics at the molecular level, a technology that humanity had developed by studying captured enemy equipment and finding weaknesses the hegemony did not know existed. 47,000 drones against 12 ships. The mathematics of the battle had shifted in ways the enemy could not imagine. "Launch the first wave," Cole ordered. "Target the lead cruiser. Let them see what 300 years of preparation looks like." The drones poured out of hidden launch bays along the Prometheus's hull. They moved through the nebula like a swarm of angry insects, guided by intelligence systems that had been perfected over generations. The hegemony sensors picked them up too late. By the time the cruiser's commander understood what was happening, the first drones were already burning through his shields. The hegemony had always believed their shield technology was unbreakable. It was one of the foundations of their military power, the reason they could conquer species after species without fear. No weapon in the galaxy could penetrate a fully powered hegemony shield. But the humans had spent 3 centuries studying those shields. They had captured pieces of destroyed enemy ships and taken them apart piece by piece. They had run millions of simulations, searching for the tiny flaws that every technology contained, and they had found them. The lead cruiser's shields collapsed in 17 seconds. The ship hung naked in space for one frozen moment before the second wave of drones tore into its hull. Explosions rippled across its surface. Escape pods launched in desperate streams, but there was nowhere safe to flee. The second cruiser tried to retreat, but it had entered the nebula too deeply. The radiation storms that the Prometheus had learned to navigate over 3 centuries were death traps for ships that did not know their patterns. The cruiser flew straight into an electromagnetic surge that fried half its systems and left it drifting helplessly. The destroyers formed a defensive formation, but their captains had never faced an enemy like this. Their training was useless. Their tactics were outdated. They were fighting the humans of 300 years ago, ships with traditional weapons and predictable strategies. They were not prepared for what humanity had become. One by one, the hegemony ships fell. Some were destroyed outright. Others were disabled and left drifting, their crews alive but helpless. Cole gave orders to spare lives when possible. He was not interested in simple slaughter. He wanted survivors. He wanted witnesses. Within an hour, 11 of the 12 ships were burning wrecks or powerless hulks. Only one remained functional, a small communications frigate that had stayed at the edge of the formation. Cole ordered his gunners to disable its weapons and engines, but leave its communication systems intact. He opened a channel to the terrified crew aboard the crippled ship. When his face appeared on their screens, they saw a human for the first time in their lives. Most had believed the species was extinct. Now they stared at the face of their nightmare made real. "I am Captain Cole of the HSS Prometheus," he said calmly. "Flagship of the human remnant fleet. You will return to your masters and deliver a message." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Tell them that humanity remembers. We remember Earth. We remember every colony they burned, every ship they destroyed, every child they killed. We have spent 300 years in the darkness, preparing for this moment. The ghost of the Prometheus is awake, and we are coming." Cole leaned forward, his eyes burning with cold fire. "We are not coming for peace. We are not coming for negotiation. We are coming for justice, and we will not stop until we have it." He cut the transmission and turned to, "Release the frigate. Let them run home and spread the word." The small ship fled as fast as its damaged engines could carry it. Behind it, the Prometheus vanished back into the radiation storms that had protected it for centuries. The wreckage of the hegemony battle group drifted silently, a monument to the terrible mistake the galaxy's masters had made. They had tried to destroy humanity completely. They had failed, and now they would learn what it meant to face an enemy with nothing left to lose. The storm of destruction had begun. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire burning through dry grass. No matter how hard the hegemony tried to contain it, the story escaped through smugglers and merchants, through rebels and spies, through whispers in dark corners and shouts in crowded markets. The humans had survived, the humans had returned, and they had destroyed a hegemony battle group in less than an hour. For the species living under hegemony rule, the news changed everything. The Who's had been conquered 50 years after Earth fell, suddenly remembered the old stories their grandparents had told them. Stories about a species that never gave up, that fought until their last breath, that would rather die than submit. The Who's engineers had been enslaved to build hegemony warships for centuries, began to sabotage their own work in small ways that could not be traced. The Who's warriors had once fought alongside humans before the Great Betrayal, sharpened their hidden weapons and waited for a signal. Resistance cells that had been dormant since the human war suddenly woke up. Communications passed between species that had never trusted each other before, all of them asking the same question. If the humans could survive total annihilation, what else was possible? Captain Cole understood that his ship alone could not defeat an empire. The Prometheus was powerful, but the hegemony commanded thousands of vessels and controlled hundreds of worlds. Direct confrontation would end in the same destruction that had claimed Earth 3 centuries ago. But Cole also understood something that the hegemony had forgotten. Empires built on fear were fragile things. They looked strong from the outside, but their foundations were rotten. Every species they ruled hated them. Every world they controlled dreamed of freedom. The hegemony maintained power not through loyalty but through terror, and terror only worked as long as people believed resistance was impossible. The Prometheus had just proven that it was not. Cole took his ship out of the nebula for the first time in 300 years. He did not attack hegemony installations or engage their fleets. Instead, he went searching for allies. The first meeting happened on a dead moon in neutral space. Cole brought a small team, including a security detail. They found a group of rebels waiting for them, nervous but determined. The leader, a female named, had spent her entire life dreaming of this moment. "We kept your stories alive," she told Cole. "When the hegemony banned human culture, we hid it. We preserved your music, your literature, your history. We told our children about the species that almost won, that fought until the end, that never surrendered." Cole felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in years. Hope. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk your lives to preserve the memory of a dead species?" His answer was simple. "Because you showed us what was possible. Before the humans, no one had ever truly challenged the hegemony. After you fell, we knew that someone someday would try again. We wanted to be ready. The alliance was formed that night. Within weeks, the Prometheus had made contact with a dozen other resistance groups. Engineers offered their expertise in building ships and weapons. Warriors pledged their swords to the cause. Smaller species that the hegemony barely noticed volunteered to serve as spies and messengers. Cole shared everything: the technology that had kept humanity alive in the nebula, the weapons that had destroyed the hegemony battle group, the tactics that had allowed a single ship to defeat an entire fleet. He held nothing back, understanding that humanity's survival depended on lifting up their allies, not keeping them weak. The coalition grew stronger with each passing month. Hidden factories began producing Tempest drones for rebel fleets. Engineers developed new shields based on human designs. Warriors trained in human combat techniques that emphasized speed and surprise over raw power. And then Cole revealed the truth that he had kept secret until this moment. The Prometheus was not alone. Deep in the nebula, hidden even from most of the human survivors, two other ships had been built over the past century. The Achilles was a fast attack cruiser, designed for hit-and-run strikes against enemy supply lines. The Valkyrie was an assault carrier, capable of delivering ground troops anywhere in the galaxy. Both ships were smaller than the Prometheus, but just as deadly, crewed by humans who had been training for war since birth. The hegemony had spent 300 years believing they had destroyed every human ship. They were wrong by 3. With the coalition forces growing and 3 warships ready for battle, Cole began planning a campaign of strikes across hegemony space. The targets were carefully chosen: supply depots that fed the enemy war machine, communication stations that allowed the Council to coordinate their forces, prison worlds where political dissidents were held. Each attack was quick and brutal. The human ships would appear without warning, strike with overwhelming force, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. The hegemony commanders never knew where the next blow would fall. They spread their forces thin, trying to defend everything, which meant they could defend nothing. But more important than the military victories were the symbolic ones. When the Prometheus freed a prison world, the images of human soldiers fighting alongside rebels spread across the galaxy. When the Achilles destroyed a slave factory, the workers who escaped told stories of the strange beings who had risked everything to save them. The legend of humanity grew with each battle. The hegemony tried to counter it with propaganda, claiming that the humans were monsters who would destroy anyone who opposed them. But the freed prisoners and rescued slaves told a different story. They spoke of humans who showed mercy to surrendering enemies, humans who shared their food and medicine with alien refugees, humans who treated other species as equals, not subjects. This was the true weapon that Cole wielded, not the Tempest drones or the advanced shields or the 3 warships under his command. It was the idea that the galaxy could be different, that species could work together instead of dominating each other. That freedom was possible for everyone, not just the powerful. The Hegemony Council watched their empire begin to crack and knew they had to respond. They gathered their fleets. They activated weapons that had not been used since the human war. They prepared to crush the rebellion with the same total violence they had used against Earth. But Cole was ready for them. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. And unlike the hegemony, he had something more powerful than fear on his side. He had hope. The Hegemony Council met in their fortress at the heart of the galaxy, surrounded by the greatest concentration of military power ever assembled. They were afraid, though none would admit it openly. The rebellion had spread faster than anyone predicted. Worlds that had been loyal for centuries were now in open revolt. Fleets that had seemed invincible were being picked apart by enemies they could not catch. The 12 council members argued for days about how to respond. Some wanted negotiation, hopping to buy time while they rebuilt their forces. Others demanded immediate and total war against every rebel species. In the end, they would use the Eradicator Array. The array was a secret that only the Council knew. It was a network of satellites positioned around key rebel worlds, each one capable of destroying an entire planet. The technology dated back to the Human War, when the hegemony had used similar weapons to burn Earth and the colonies. After the war, the Council had maintained the array in secret, knowing that someday they might need it again. That day had come. The array's control station was located in the Nexus system, the most heavily fortified location in hegemony space. 300 warships guarded it. Defensive platforms surrounded every approach. The station itself was protected by shields that could withstand a direct nuclear strike. The Council gave the order. In 12 hours, the array would activate. Every world that had joined the rebellion would be destroyed. Billions of lives would end in an instant. The galaxy would learn once, and for all that resistance against the hegemony meant total annihilation. A spy in the Council's inner circle managed to transmit a warning before being captured and executed. The message reached Captain Cole just 6 hours before the array would fire. Cole called an emergency meeting of the Coalition's military commanders. Representatives from every rebel species gathered in the war room of the Prometheus, their faces grim as they studied the tactical data. The situation was impossible. The Nexus system was too well defended. Even if the entire Coalition fleet attacked at once, they would be destroyed long before reaching the control station. And they did not have the entire Coalition fleet. They had maybe 200 ships against the hegemony's 300, plus the defensive platforms, plus the countless weapon satellites that surrounded the system. "We cannot win this battle," said the leader. Her voice was steady, but Cole could see the despair in her eyes. "If we attack, we die. If we do not attack, our worlds burn. Either way, we lose." Cole stood silently, studying the holographic display that showed the enemy positions. He had spent his entire life preparing for a moment like this. Every lesson he had learned, every battle he had fought, every sacrifice his people had made over 3 centuries, it all came down to this decision. "We attack," he said finally, "not to win, to give our ground teams enough time to reach the station and destroy it from inside." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he was proposing. The fleet would serve as a distraction, drawing the hegemony's attention while a small team infiltrated the station. Most of the ships would be destroyed. Thousands would die. And even if the ground team succeeded, they would almost certainly die as well. "I will lead the ground assault myself," said before Cole could speak. "The Prometheus is too important to risk in a suicide mission, but I can take the Valkyrie and crash her into the station. My Marines will fight their way to the control center." Cole wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. The Prometheus had to survive to lead whatever remained of the Coalition after the battle, and was the best tactical officer he had ever known. If anyone could pull off this impossible mission, it was her. "Then we are agreed," he said. "We launch in 1 hour." The Battle of Nexus began at dawn hegemony time. The Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace in a scattered formation designed to confuse enemy targeting systems. Immediately, the hegemony ships moved to intercept, exactly as Cole had predicted. The Prometheus led the main attack force, driving straight toward the center of the enemy formation. Cole pushed his ship to its limits, demanding more speed, more power, more firepower than should have been possible. The Tempest drones poured out in endless waves, creating chaos among the enemy ranks. The Achilles took the right flank, dancing between enemy ships with impossible grace. Her captain, a young woman named Sarah, had inherited her grandmother's gift for tactical brilliance. She destroyed 3 enemy destroyers in the first 10 minutes, her ship moving so fast that enemy gunners could not track her. But it was not enough. The hegemony had too many ships, too many guns, too much power. Coalition vessels began to fall. The Achilles took a devastating hit to her port side, killing half her crew instantly. Kept fighting, her ship trailing fire and debris until a second strike destroyed her reactor. The Achilles exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from 1,000,000 kilometers away. Sarah and her entire crew died in that moment, but they took 2 enemy cruisers with them. Cole felt the loss like a physical blow, but he could not stop to grieve. The battle was reaching its critical moment. The Valkyrie had used the chaos of the fleet battle to approach the control station undetected, guided her damaged ship through the defensive fire, taking hit after hit, losing section after section to enemy weapons. When the Valkyrie finally crashed into the station's docking bay, she was little more than a flying wreck held together by willpower and luck. Led her Marines through the burning corridors of the station. They fought past guards and security systems, leaving a trail of bodies behind them. Every step cost lives. Every corner brought new enemies. But they kept pushing forward, knowing that the fate of billions depended on them reaching the control center. Meanwhile, the Prometheus found herself in a duel with the Eternal Dominion, the Hegemony flagship. The two ships circled each other like ancient predators, exchanging fire that could have destroyed moons. Cole matched wits with the enemy commander, each trying to outmaneuver the other. The battle lasted for what felt like hours. Both ships suffered terrible damage. The Prometheus lost her forward weapons array. The Dominion lost half her engines. They kept fighting anyway, too stubborn and too desperate to stop. Cole played his final card, a single torpedo designed by human engineers specifically for this moment. They called it the final word, a weapon carrying enough antimatter to crack a planet's crust. He had been saving it for 300 years, waiting for the right target. The final word struck the Dominion's reactor core. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, a flower of destruction that bloomed in the darkness of space. The Hegemony flagship died in fire, and with her, the symbol of everything humanity had fought against. But the array was still charging, and her Marines had reached the control center, but they were pinned down by the last defenders. She looked at the countdown timer and knew they had run out of time. There was only one way to stop it now. For humanity, she said into her communicator, knowing that Cole would hear her final words. Then she triggered the overload. The control station's reactor went critical. The explosion consumed everything within 100 kilometers, including her Marines and the array's central controls. The satellites across Rebel space went dark, their weapons systems permanently disabled. Billions of lives were saved, but the cost was everything. The Battle of Nexus broke the Hegemony's spine. Their flagship was destroyed. Their ultimate weapon was gone. Their fleet had suffered losses from which it could never recover. But more than that, their myth of invincibility had been shattered forever. In the weeks that followed, the collapse came faster than anyone expected. Species that had been loyal to the Hegemony for centuries suddenly remembered their hatred. Worlds that had never dared to resist rose up in revolt. The Council's orders went ignored. Their threats became meaningless. An empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years fell apart in less than a month. The Council surrendered on a cold morning in the ruins of their fortress. The surviving members, only 5 of the original 12, knelt before representatives of every species they had once oppressed. They signed documents that stripped them of all power and placed them under arrest for crimes against the galaxy. They would spend the rest of their lives in prison, forced to watch the new order rise without them. Captain Cole survived the Battle of Nexus, though barely. A piece of shrapnel had torn through his side during the final moments of the fight with the Dominion. He spent 3 months in a medical bay built by doctors working alongside human engineers, a symbol of the cooperation that would define the new era. When he finally walked again, it was onto the bridge of a rebuilt Prometheus. The ship had been repaired and upgraded, her scars covered by new armor, her damaged systems replaced with technology donated by grateful allies. She was no longer just a human vessel. She was the flagship of the newly formed Galactic Commonwealth, a coalition of free species committed to building something better than what had come before. The Commonwealth was not a perfect government. How could it be? It was made up of species that had been enemies for centuries, traumatized populations learning to trust each other for the first time, leaders who often disagreed about the best path forward. But it was honest about its flaws and committed to fixing them. Every species had an equal voice. Every world had a vote. No one would ever again fear annihilation for the crime of being different. On the first anniversary of the Battle of Nexus, Cole stood before a memorial on New Terra. This world had been given to humanity by their grateful allies, a planet with oceans and forests that reminded the survivors of the Earth they had lost. It was not home. Home was gone forever, but it was a place where humanity could finally stop running and start building. Representatives from every free species in the Commonwealth attended the ceremony and stood beside a dozen others. They had come to honor the fallen and celebrate the living, to remember what had been sacrificed and to commit to a future worthy of that sacrifice. Cole looked out at the crowd, seeing faces of every shape and color, and felt something he had rarely allowed himself to feel. Pride, not just in what humanity had accomplished, but in what they had accomplished together. 300 years ago, he began, his voice carrying across the silent gathering, the hegemony tried to erase humanity from existence. They they destroyed our colonies, they hunted our ships and killed our children. They believed that by eliminating us completely, they could remove the threat we represented. He paused, letting his words settle over the crowd. They were wrong, not because we survived, though we did, not because we fought back, though we did that too. They were wrong because the threat we represented was not our ships or our weapons or our numbers. The threat was an idea. The idea that no species has the right to rule over others. The idea that freedom is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The idea that hope can survive even in the darkest places. Cole thought of, who had given her life to save billions she had never met. He thought of Sarah and the crew of the Achilles, who had died buying time for a mission that seemed impossible. He thought of Admiral Vance, who had led her people into exile and kept them alive for 200 years through sheer force of will. The humans you see here today are the last of our kind. Fewer than 70,000 of us remain, scattered across the galaxy. We will never again have the numbers we once had. We will never rebuild the civilization that was taken from us. In that sense, the hegemony succeeded. They broke us in ways that can never be fully healed. He saw tears on human faces and on alien ones. The grief was shared across every species that had lost something to the hegemony's cruelty. But we did not survive to seek vengeance. Vengeance is what we became when we had nothing else to live for. It kept us going through 3 centuries of darkness, gave us purpose when all seemed lost. Now that the darkness has lifted, we need a new purpose. Not destruction, but creation. Not hatred, but hope. Not war, but peace. Cole looked up at the sky, where the Prometheus hung in orbit alongside ships from a dozen species. The ghost warship that had carried humanity's last hope through the void was still there, still watching over her children. The storm of destruction is over. Now comes the harder work, building a peace that honors everyone who died to make it possible, creating a galaxy where species work together instead of dominating each other, raising children who will never know the fear and hatred that defined our lives. He stepped back from the podium, signaling that his prepared speech was finished. But before the ceremony could continue, he spoke one final time, his words quiet but heard by everyone. Lieutenant Commander once told me that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not our technology or our tactics. It was our stubbornness, our refusal to accept that anything was impossible, our belief that tomorrow could be better than today if we were willing to fight for it. He smiled, a rare expression on his weathered face. She was right, and now we pass that gift to all of you. Take it, use it, build something worthy of everyone who died so that you could be free. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across New Terra and were carried by communication networks to every corner of the Commonwealth. On worlds that had been enslaved for centuries, people celebrated their first full year of freedom. In space stations and on starships, crews of mixed species raised toasts to the future. And in schools across the galaxy, teachers began telling a new generation about the ghost warship that had emerged from impossible darkness, about the humans who had refused to die, who had turned tragedy into triumph, who had proven that even against the mightiest empires, the unconquerable spirit of hope could prevail. The Prometheus would be retired soon, transformed into a museum and monument that anyone could visit, but her legend would endure forever. She was proof that survival was possible, that justice could be won, that the darkness, no matter how deep, would always give way to dawn. In the nebula, where it had all begun, the radiation storms continued to rage around empty space. But somewhere in those deadly clouds, faint traces of an old transmission still echoed, a simple message that had traveled from the depths of despair to the heights of victory. We remember, we endure, we return. Humanity had done all three, and the galaxy would never forget.